Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Chautauqua, our Living History program. I would like to talk a little bit about our library foundation. The Cañon City Public Library Foundation puts these programs on and covers all the expenses. So we do have a donation jar. As you came in, I saw some people donating. Thank you very much. I would like to say thank you to the Presbyterian Church, which is now called the Steeple, for letting us use this venue. There's also a donation box for them as you walk out. I would like to now introduce David Skipper as Edgar Allan Poe.
Lo, 'tis a gala night among these lonesome latter years. An angel throng, bewinged, bedight, in veils and drowned in tears. As we sit in a theater to see a play of hopes and fears, as the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. The spheres, the music of the spheres. I am honored that you have so very warmly welcomed me on my behalf. For some months past, I have been lingering with an indisposition, so to divert my spirits a little in this miserable fog of ennui, I am delighted to share with you some of the music from my spheres. I was thrust upon this dismal state of life on a cold January in 1809. My mother, Elizabeth Arnold, and my father, David Poe, were actors, the Charleston and Virginia Players, and the Boston Theater. And they traveled up and down the eastern seaboard, portraying some of the great works of Shakespeare. I can remember vividly being held in the wings by a nursemaid as my mother played some of the greatest roles Shakespeare had ever written. Juliet from Romeo and Juliet, Ophelia. My father abandoned us and left my poor mother to care for us. I had an elder brother, Henry Leonard, and a just newborn baby sister, Rosalie. And my mother contracted a dreadful consumption and lingered on her deathbed when I was only 2.5 years of age. My poor mother died, leaving us orphans to the world. My eldest brother, Henry Leonard, was taken in by the Poes of Baltimore. My little sister, Rosalie, was adopted into the Mackenzie family. Very good friends with the Allen family, who took me in as their foster child. My mother didn't have very much to leave me. But she did leave me two things. She left me a small watercolor portrait of Boston Harbor, on the back of which she inscribed, "For my little son Edgar, who should ever love Boston, the place of his birth, and where his mother found his best and dearest friends." The other thing she left me was this small watercolor portrait album, which I carry with me everywhere I go. Dear sweet Mom, because I feel that in the heavens above, the angels whispering to one another can find among their burning terms of love none so devotional as that of mother. As I said, I was taken in by the John Allen family, a wealthy Scottish merchant of Richmond, Virginia, and his wife, Frances. As I said, I was never adopted by Allen. I was treated as their own child. My foster father was born in the seaport town of Irving, Scotland. Orphaned early himself, Allen came to America with his uncle William Galt, a wealthy merchant with considerable interests in the trade of colonial produce. Mr. A began as a clerk in his uncle's business and soon started his own concern as carriers and shippers of tobacco, wheat, hay, swine, horses, and unfortunately slaves, which the third both bought and sold. The Napoleonic Wars had ended, and my foster father had decided that he wanted to renew his business interests in England and Scotland. He wanted to collect upon the debts and reestablish his English connections. After a voyage of 36 days across the great Atlantic Ocean, we reached Liverpool on July the 18th, 1815, and continued our journey up to Irving, Scotland. That is where most of the Allen clan resided. Here, at the age of 6, I was torn from the adoration of my dear, sweet Bob, and packed off to one of those bleak pre-Reformation Cañon schools you so often hear about, where the maxim is, children are like beefsteaks. The more you whip them, the more tender they become. I was a rebellious dreamer in the classroom, and in an attempt to corral my rebellious nature, daydreaming, my schoolmaster would send me out into the kirkyard, the churchyard, the cemetery, to copy epitaphs off the tombstones. And it was here for the first time that I was exposed to the most beautiful and eloquent poetry, the poetry of death. Their lyrical poetry made an indelible impression upon me. For example, a lovely Christian spouse and friend, pleasant life and at her end, a pale consumption dealt the blow that laid her here with dust below. I often took long solitary walks in Lord Kilmarnock's park, where it was said that the ghost of a young woman, jilted in romance, was said to roam. I felt the refreshing chilliness of its 1,000 deeply shadowed avenues, and hailed the fragrance of its 1,000 shrubberies, and thrilled anew with undefinable delight at the deep hollow note of the church bell, breaking each hour with sullen and sudden roar upon the stillness on which the fretted Gothic steeples lay embedded and asleep. Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells. What a world of solemn thought their melody compels. In silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy menace of their tone. From every sound that floats, from the dust within their throats, is a groan. Shh. Listen. Do you hear it? Listen to the death watches in the night, and they will speak to you as they have spoken to me on countless night after night after night. We expect our epitaphs today to be more serious memorials. Most tombstone inscriptions today and in the past meet without expectations. But our recent ancestors did not worry as much as we do about poetic decorum. Sometimes by accident, usually deliberately, they crafted humorous verse over the dearly departed. Perhaps they were warming to the humor of the chill of that unknown. More obviously, they devoutly believe that death is only a doorway to an afterlife, a dark shadow that deserves a last laugh. And thus, unlikely as it seems, I, Edgar Poe, have found humor in death. In my journeys into the cemetery, I found it a relief from the dark, dank halls of the old school, and it put me in the brilliant, warm sunshine and beauty of the cemetery. And I took to writing down some of my favorite verses into my commonplace book, and I would like to share some of those with you. Here we have a baker who is retired into the afterlife. Throughout his life, he kneaded bread and deemed it quite a bore, but now 6 feet beneath earth's crust, he kneadeth bread no more. Now here is a questionable tribute to a man who was frozen to death in the wintertime. The winter snow congealed his form. Now we know our uncle's warm. Now you have to think about this one. The literacy involved in these verses, sacred to the memory of 3 twins. Drink never hurt this good lady. She drank good ale, good punch and wine, and lived to the age of 99. This is one of my favorites. Above the cremated remains of the dearly departed, it reads, "And this is all that's left of thee, thou fairest of earth's daughters, only 4 pounds of ashes white, out of 203 This is a favorite. This is what I expected, but not so soon. Now, you have to imagine what the family was thinking when they inscribed this verse over the tombstone of their dearly departed. Here lies Bernard Blackfoot, who was accidentally killed in the 45th year of his age, erected by his grateful family. You have to let some of these sink in. Or in a similar vein, accidentally shot the 4th of April, 1810, as a mark of affection from his brother. He lived and died a true Christian. He loved his friends and hated his enemies. Remember me as you pass by, as you are now, sometimes I. As I am now, you soon will be. Therefore prepare to follow me. To which later was added, to follow you I'm not content until I know which way you went. I am not grieved, my dearest life. Sleep on, I have got another wife. Therefore I cannot come to thee, for I must go and live with thee. To the memory of Jared Bates, his widow, aged 24, lives at 7 Elm Street, has every qualification for a good wife, and yearns to be comforted. Now, this husband's opinion is very absurd. She was more to me than I expected. And written for a blind wood sawyer, while none ever saw him see, thousands have seen him saw. And probably the most eloquent, most beautiful single word epitaph ever composed for a gardener on his grave simply reads, transplanted. Of all the melancholy topics in this world, what, according to the universal understanding of mankind, is the most melancholy? Anyone? Death is the obvious reply. And when is this most melancholy of topics most pleasant? When it aligns itself with beauty. The death, then, of a beautiful young woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in this world to me. And this continues to be a theme in many of my poetical and prose works. Throughout my cursed life, I have been plagued by the loss of those very, very dear to me. My own loving mom, Elizabeth Arnold, was taken away from me when I was 2½. She was consumed by the ravages of the Red Death. Jane Stannard, the mother of one of my best friends, a beautiful, vibrant young woman, died of a horrible brain lesion. Helen, thy beauty is to me like those Mycenaean barks of yore, that gently o'er a perfumed sea the wearier, wayward wanderer bore to his own native shore. On desperate seas, long wont to roam, thy hyacinth hair, thy classic face, thy naiad airs have brought me home to the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that is Rome. My own dear Ma Fanny Allen was taken from me, a beautiful young woman whom I loved as much as my own dear Ma. And my own dear, darling wife, Sissy. My life, my wife, my bride, Virginia was taken from me. A beautiful, beautiful young woman. I feel a great responsibility for the death of my Virginia. It was our custom, after the supper dishes were cleared away, that her mother would play the piano and that she would sing. And she had the most beautiful angelic voice. It was on this one occasion when she was singing, I saw one tiny spot of red blood appear upon her lip. She had burst a blood vessel while singing. And I was plunged into a spiral of death, of protracted death. I composed 3 poems that are dedicated to my Virginia, though there are many who believe they are the Lost Lenore, the Ulalu, or the Annabelle Lee, but I assure you, as I wrote these 3 poems during my little wife's protracted, agonizing death, they were written for her. Annabelle Lee. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabelle Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to be loved and loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love. I and my Annabelle Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabelle Lee, so that her highborn kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabelle Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever the soul of my soul, of my beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of my beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night time, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in the sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. I'm sure this is all what you've come to hear. The Raven I composed to earn money from my wife and I. And I was only able to sell it to a publication for $15. And that was a hard bargain to begin with. The Raven made me famous. And I suppose I am indebted to my literary creativity in creating such a thing. I became so famous that as I walked the streets of New York, children would run behind me, squawking, "Nevermore! Nevermore!" And I was quite delighted. But again, it brings up the thoughts of mournful and never-ending remembrance. The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember brought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name the Lord, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into my chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, with many a flirt and flutter. In there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a busted palace, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it bore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure a craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore, tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Much I marvel this ungainly fowl, to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning no relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends had flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken, my reply so aptly spoken. Doubtless, said I, what it utters is only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master who unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking, fancy unto fancy thinking, what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, Nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfume from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and nippeth from my memories of Lenore, Oh, quaff this kind of and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempest sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore. Desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm and gilly? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign in parting, bird or fiend I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest in the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the dust upon my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. The raven never flitted, still is sitting on that pallid busted palace just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight over him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. The dead rest only as long as they remain in living memory. When forgotten, they return to us in anger. To forget them is to incur the guilt of disloyalty and risk reprisal from the betrayed departed. Thus, from this perspective, the student in this poem suffers not only from an inability to stop remembering, but also from a fear of forgetting. Mournful and never-ending remembrance. Thank heaven the crisis, the danger is past, and the lingering illness is over at last. The fever called living is conquered at last. Thank you. I will now entertain questions from the audience. Questions? Mr. Yes.
Why did you not live in Boston? Why did you go to New York? Was there a reason you went to New York as opposed to...
I moved around the eastern seaboard quite a bit. I was born in Boston, but I was taken in by the Allen family of Richmond, Virginia. And that's where my Virginia roots became rooted, so to speak. And I traveled traveled all around the East, especially New York, because I was also a literary critic. I was called the Tomahawk because my criticisms were quite deadly. I worked in Philadelphia. In fact, I met Charles Dickens when he came to America in 1842 in Philadelphia. And we talked about our mutual interest in copyright law because there was no protection for writers. Anything that was composed fell into the purview and the business of the publishers. And so we wanted to create a national copyright, an international copyright law to protect us writers. Because for example, when I had the Raven published in one newspaper, it was immediately reprinted in dozens of other newspapers, but I received no compensation whatsoever. In fact, they were also parodies done of my poems as well. But those I did not quite object to. Yes?
Could you address your death?
No, I can't, because I'm still alive. Perhaps the gentleman who brought me here will respond to that in a moment. But in my current ethereal state, I am afraid I'm still with you.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Was everything that you wrote very dark? Did you write anything that was...
Oh, was everything I wrote very dark? No, it was not. I loved writing love poetry. I wrote many different genres. I wrote 3 stories about ratiocination, the detection of crime. Of course, my main interest was in psychological horror. And people equate the things that I write with me as an individual who is mad. But I assure you that I am not mad. I am writing about mad people. If you were to meet me on the street, you would say that Mr. Poe's a well-bred Southern gentleman. But because of the dark things that I've written, people often associate me with madness. And I'm not mad, I just write about mad people. I also have taken to writing essays on the exploration and purpose of our ever-expanding universe. Eureka, a poem. I write adventure. I am dabbling in writing science fiction. So I read a great deal from newspapers, and I find articles that are appealing to me. For example, I write about the premature burial. I found a clipping in a newspaper that talked about people who were so afraid of death that they would purchase for their coffins a bell to be mounted on top of their coffin with a string running down with a hole in the coffin. Lest they feel they are not quite dead, they can ring that bell. People would not name their children until they were 5 or 6 years of age because the infant mortality rate was so high. So I found these things to be frightful to people, and so that's what I do in my writing, is I present to you with the horror of your own potential demise, such as the pit of the pinion. It's for you to believe or not to believe. Another question. Yes?
Did you remarry or have another romance after your wife died?
Well, in fact, I am engaged now right to Elmira Weiston, who was my childhood sweetheart when I lived in Virginia. Elmira and I had pledged our love to one another when we were 15, 16 years of age. And I was sent to the University of Virginia. And I would write her letters from the university, but her father did not see me as an appropriate suitor for his daughter, and he intercepted those letters and destroyed them. The letters she wrote to me, he took those and destroyed them. So for many years, we did not know that we still had an affection for one another, that our love was lost because of the intervention of people. When my wife, Virginia, died, I became reacquainted with Elmira. She had lost her husband, and we had pledged ourselves anew. And in fact, I am due to go to Philadelphia in several weeks to edit a volume of poetry for a lady, which will bring me a reward of $100, and we will be married when I return. Yes,
What year is this that you are going to Philadelphia?
this is 1849. Yes,
And whose remains are in the chair?
those are Fortunatos.
Are who?
Fortunato,
Oh, Fortunato.
the cask of Amontillado, the 1,001 injuries of Fortunato I had borne. But when insult became the norm, revenge became my motive. And the cask of Amontillado was about revenge. Yes,
Do you consider yourself poor or middle class or wealthy?
I am very poor. In fact, I write for money. Which many people don't see that as a fit living for someone, but that is what I am endeavoring to do, is to make a living as a writer. Yes.
Were you able to stay in touch with your siblings, or were you?
Unfortunately, my brother, Henry Leonard, died of consumption and of the plague of alcoholism. I still remain in touch with my little sister, Rosalie, who adores me. And I adore her as well. One last question, yes.
What would be your favorite piece of work, personal favorite?
I think probably The Fall of the House of Usher would be one of my favorites, probably the most closely aligned as an autobiography, as I picture myself as the friend coming to visit Roderick Usher and seeing the house go mad before me, and it begins to consume me before I can escape. Yes.
What was your major in college at the University of Virginia?
Well, I never finished. I was studying literature, I was studying languages. The problem I had was that when I was sent to the university, my foster father, the skin-flint Scotsman that he was, did not give me enough money for books. I had no money for clothing. I barely had enough for my own lodging, and so I had to gamble in order to try to make money to pay for the things that I needed. And I was not a very good gambler. And I racked up a considerable amount of debt. And after numerous pleadings, my foster father did pay my debts. And I then decided that I would go to West Point and become a cadet. And that did not end well either. I did publish my first book of poetry as I was leaving West Point. I did join the United States Army and rose to the rank of Sergeant Major, and then was mustered out. But my university career was a raucous place to be. Thomas Jefferson was the president of the university. There were a lot of shootings and murders taking place, so it wasn't a very safe campus to be on. Yes.
Do you have children?
No, sadly, Virginia and I never had children. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to the gentleman who brought me here today, and thank you for indulging me with a little bit of my co-chorus. Thank you, thank you. Now I can respond to your question in regards to how did he die? I think it is worth stating that for the father of the mystery novel, science fiction story, the adventure story, and the horror story, that he left us with the greatest mystery of all, and that is how he met his demise. And I have studied Poe for some 30 years and have come to the conclusion, this is my conclusion, based on various theories that people have put forward. As I mentioned earlier in my monologue, he was engaged to be married to his original childhood sweetheart, Elmira Royston. Her brothers did not find that they wanted Poe to marry their sister. He felt that he was only going after her for her money, which he was not. He was engaged by a society woman in Philadelphia in October to go up and edit a volume of her poetry for which he would be paid $100. He was visibly ill when he left Virginia, when he left Elmira in Richmond, Virginia, to board a steamship up the eastern coast. He disappeared for 2 weeks. He turned up. Someone noticed him, a printer noticed him in a tavern. He was completely disheveled. He was not wearing his own clothes. He didn't know who he was. And he was taken to the hospital. There he lingered for several days, raging in fits of madness and quiet. He finally passed with his final words being documented as, "Lord, please take my poor soul." What I believed happened is that Poe, it wasn't really addressed by any of the questions, he had a predisposition for alcohol like his father did, like his brother did. It was a genetic indisposition to alcohol. Poe could take one drink and then he would go into a spiral that could last for 6 months. Yet he could be as sober as a judge, if you want to use that word out cliche, if you know any sober judges, for years at a time. He had pledged to Elmira that he was going to become a member of a temperance union. He would not touch alcohol, and that she agreed that they would marry. What I believe also happened is that some years ago, it's been probably 20 years ago now, because I've been doing this program 25 or 30 years, a New England medical college each year gives a physician a case study to look at the symptoms of the individual and try to determine, based upon what are in the documents what this individual died from. And this physician was given the file of Edgar Allan Poe, though he did not know who it was. Based upon his research, upon the information contained in these files, it was determined that this individual, Edgar Allan Poe, died as a result of encephalitic rabies. Poe had a great fondness for animals, despite the fact that he wrote about gouging cats' eyes out and walling them up into the brickworks. He loved cats. In fact, he had a pet black cat, Katrina, that would sit on his shoulders as he wrote. But it's not unlikely that he may have come across a rabid animal that bit him, and because it takes this form of rabies such a long time to gestate, all of these things started to collide on the last 2 weeks of his life. He was visibly sweating when he left Elmira. I think her brothers followed him on his journey. They accosted him, they beat him up, they plied him with liquor to get him in a state of not knowing who or where he was, and he ended up in this tavern, as I said, disheveled with not even the clothes he was wearing. He had a trunk that he took with him on his journey and a cane. And these things have remained a curious oddity in the Poe mythology. The cane was picked up accidentally by another physician who was on the steamboat. But the trunk was never found. So maybe it was dumped into the Atlantic, who knows. But that's how I believe the father of the mystery story met his demise. Other questions? Yes?
What made you become Edgar Allan Poe?
Well, I've always had a fondness for Edgar Allan Poe, and because there are so many myths and misconceptions about him, I wanted to portray him as you would have seen him in his day, that he was a rational human being. He was not mad. Yes, he had an alcohol problem. He could be a right bloody bastard if he got inebriated. But most of the time, and I also emphasize this when I've done these programs for schools and so forth, Poe never wrote any of his stories while under the influence of any alcohol or drugs. There is often people saying that Poe, he was an opium addict. He never touched opium. The only thing he did was on one occasion, after one of his love affairs did not go so well, he attempted to take laudanum. And all it did was make him wretchedly sick. And that was the only drug he ever took. So that's why I chose to do Poe, besides about his wonderful, beautiful poetry and his fantastic stories. I grew up watching the Roger Corman, Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe motion pictures, which really have very little to do with the actual stories, but they're really good anyway. Other questions? When do you eat? I don't know.
Where are you from originally?
Where am I from originally? I am from Florida originally, but I've been living here in Colorado for the past 20 years. I live in Aurora. Yeah, I got tired of hurricanes, mosquitoes, and tornado bugs, and decided to come here where there were actual seasons. Yes?
Have you ever traveled to any of his home sites or where he grew up?
Oh, yes. There is the Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia. It's not really connected to Poe. It's just the oldest building still standing from the time of Poe, but they do have quite a bit of his relics, letters and so forth, housed in that museum. And it's a great place to visit if you have the opportunity. There's also the Poe House in Baltimore. A colleague of mine, Jeff Jerome, is the director emeritus of that museum. And it's also a wonderful place to visit. His grave site is not far from that museum.
What is his epitaph on his grave?
There is no epitaph, it's just Edgar A. Poe.
Wow.
Sad.
He could have written his own, I suppose. I've been asked that question. It would have probably been something like, I wrote, I didn't get paid for it.
How long were you in Scotland?
He was there for about 5 years. That's where he got his initial schooling, was in Scotland and England. Yes,
How old was your wife when she passed away, and how long have you been married?
she was 25 years old. And they had been married. This is where it gets. It was not uncommon during this time for people to marry when they were 14 years old. His cousin was 14 years old when they were married. But I believe Edgar Poe revered women as sacred objects. That they were to be praised, to be loved, and to have poetry written about them. So, they had a wonderful marriage. It was the first time in Poe's life where he was genuinely happy because there was a family in it. It was Virginia, her mother, who was called Muddy, and Poe. And they were all very happy together. As when she passed away, he went into a real spiral of melancholy because he had been through it before so many times. He had lost those so dear to him. And that's all he ever wanted from life, was to be in a family and was loved. And that he didn't get that when he was a foster child of John Allen. But the family of Allen did love him dearly. Yes. Yes, she was his cousin.
First cousin?
First cousin. And she adored him as well. Yes.
Did you ever make contact with the father, your original first father? Did you ever?
He disappeared. David Poe disappeared. It's not known what happened to him. He was an actor along with his wife, Poe's mother. He wasn't a very good actor. And it is believed that he died of alcoholism and consumption. Consumption at the time was, of course, tuberculosis, which they did not know about tuberculosis at that time. That was the catch-all. If they didn't know what it was, oh, you got consumption. One last question.
I might be the only poet in Cañon, Georgia.
Yes, we have a Poe right here. Let's give him a hand. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to share a little bit of Edgar Allan Poe as we move into the Halloween season. And be careful of those things that lurk in the dark. Thank you.